Most people waste a ton of energy when speed training simply because they do not know what to focus on in order to get faster. In this video, we will not be talking about how to improve your strength or your power or your explosiveness or what type of workouts you should be doing. Instead, we're going to be focusing on three components of your leg cycle, which to me is the most simple and most efficient and effective way for you to be able to run faster quickly. And the reason why is because the leg cycle is such a big determiner of how you are striking the ground and preparing yourself to strike the ground, being very quick when your foot hits the ground, as well as give you the correct angle as your foot is pushing off. So I'm sure you have heard a million times the importance of technique and really focusing on technique, but then proceed to do a bunch of things that are not necessarily addressing technique issues. And this is where, to me, looking at the back of your sprinting is just such a great way to be able to see the efficiency. So just real quick, what you want to be doing when it comes to your leg cycle is you want to be able to push straight back with the foot. So then you're able to transition straight forward and then be able to get your foot to be facing straight up towards the sky to then control foot strike back at the beginning. So we're going to be going over really three main parts of your sprinting mechanics that ends up, or your leg cycle that ends up making a big difference when it comes to your overall performance. The first one's going to be your foot strike, how you're striking the ground. The next one's going to be your mid stance. And then the last one is going to be your push off or your toe off. And we'll go a little bit more in depth into each one and why they're important. So stick around for all that information here. This is going to be very, very informative for people, whether you are a runner or a sprinter or a beginner, expert, wherever you are on the spectrum. It's going to be very beneficial because we're just going to go into some subtle keys that can end up making such a big difference. First thing let's talk about is going to be the foot strike. And again, I think this back view ends up being really important to be able to get good information on how people are running. So as your foot comes and strikes the ground, it's important that we want to be going kind of straight back with the foot strike. So you don't want your foot to be going inwards or outward. You'll be able to see that here, or too much inwards and out or outwards. So you can see with this athlete here, as she's coming through, again, this just gives a lot of great information of what we can work on, right? We can see how the leg ends up going slightly off to the side. The toe is going off to the side. We're not getting very much height with the foot. This is usually just because simply their lack of control. Your brain knows that you're not able to control the foot strike, and so therefore you don't have as much range in the leg to then strike the ground. Okay. And so we'll see a lot of different types of foot strikes. Again, you can see much more on the outside part of the foot. So it's a lot more challenging to be fast when you're just inefficient with how you're using your legs. That's really the main focus of this video. And this is also why I think it's so important to work on the single leg and understanding from a very controlled position how to use your foot, how to use your legs. So you can see here, this is a great example of somebody who's coming straight through just on one foot, getting the toe up, pulling straight down. And you can even see at the foot strike, there's a little bit of some inefficiency going on within the ankle, within the mid stance. So this is how we would know to work a little bit more on things like balance and stuff like that. So when somebody doesn't have a good leg cycle, you're going to see that with the single leg cycle as well. As the leg's coming through, we're seeing the knee going off to the side, and we're also seeing the foot not come straight up and through, which is going to impact foot strike. And I know a lot of people don't have the curved treadmill to be able to work on a single leg cycle like this. And so if you don't, I would just have any type of dowel or just work on it with like a wall, just standing upright. Are different ways to be able to really work on the same thing. I do think the more you could just work on the cycling of the leg, even if you're just doing like a high knee cycle with a overhead dowel, or, you know, just jogging and working on how your foot's striking the ground, especially if you look and see yourself kind of crossing over so you could feel what that feels like. So first you want to establish, okay, maybe you're not landing well on your right foot. You're landing more on the outside, or your foot's more turned out, or whatever the case may be. Then I would just go through maybe running 60, 70% and really feel what that feels like. Feel the difference between when you're landing with your foot facing straight ahead in comparison to when it's not. So then you can start to understand what is the issue and start to be able to work on the issue by first feeling the difference between when you're doing it correctly in comparison to when you're not doing doing correctly. So, like the stages of learning, the first thing you're going to go through is you're going to be unconsciously incompetent. You don't even realize this is a problem, to now at least being consciously incompetent. So now you could actually feel that your foot is not in the right position. So that's really the first step here in being able to help you out with your foot strike, as well as really any part of your leg cycle. So once we start to understand the foot striking, and this ends up transitioning into so many different issues. So if you strike with the outside part of the foot in comparison to the inside part of the foot, this will make it so then the momentum that you'll get in the leg is going to go more from out to in, which is going to put a lot more torque on the knee. It's going to make it so you're going to require much more internal rotation of the leg rather than extension of the leg, which will then make it so you don't get to use your hamstrings as much, your glutes as much, or you'll overuse certain parts of your hamstrings, certain parts of your body. And typically that'll also lead itself to not have as much range of motion in the hip flexor. So the better extension, the better use of the extensor muscles, the glutes and the upper hamstrings, then the more range you're going to have through the hip flexors, which will then make it so you run faster. Once you start to limit the use of your glutes, let's say, that's going to make it so then you're not able to use your hip flexors well, or not have as much range of motion in your hip flexors. The next thing we're going to go into is going to be the mid stance, which is essentially when you're stabilized, when you're balancing. So there's three different parts of when your foot's on the ground. The first thing is going to be that foot strike, or that initial contact when your foot is first striking the ground, which is when I just went over. And then after that, you're going to go through this mid stance, or kind of stabilization phase. So now your foot's on the ground and you're preparing to toe off, but you're not actually going to toe off. So everything in between the foot strike and the toe off is what's considered your mid stance. Essentially, this is when you're going to be balancing and controlling your foot. And what's important here is to just do this as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible. When it comes to sprinting performance, what ends up being a big difference here is, as we know, the amount of force you're able to generate onto the ground. But what makes this so you can generate more force is more control. If you can't control the amount of force you're generating into the ground currently, then you're not going to be able to generate more force. You have to first be able to stabilize the force that you're generating now before you get more. So in order to do that, what you have to do is understand what is causing an inability to effectively stabilize. So when you watch yourself run, if you're starting to see maybe you're landing on the outside part of the foot, maybe you're landing with the foot too far back, this could be making it so then you're spending more time on the ground and not able to transition as effectively. Essentially, when it comes to your foot strike, we want to be able to do this as quickly as possible. So spending the least amount of time on the ground is really a big differentiator between elite sprinters or elite runners and not elite runners. And the big difference a lot of times is simply how is your foot hitting the ground. So if you're hitting the ground with more of your weight back, or more on the outside, or if your foot is in a turned position, or if your foot's facing too far in, too far out, or your foot is inside too much of your body, all these things end up making it so you will end up spending more time on the ground. These subtle little differences in what you're doing could be making it so then you are spending too much time on the ground. So what you want to have a general rule of thumb is, when you're at your top speed, is you want to be under 0.1 seconds foot contact time. And when you're accelerating, you really want to be in like a 0.15 range when it comes to your acceleration. It could be a little bit higher, but once you get over like 0.2, then that's a problem. Or even at 0.2, that's a problem when it comes to your acceleration. And then if you're over 0.1, then that also ends up being a problem. If you're at 0.1, it's not bad, but you want to really be able to get under 0.1 with your foot contact at top speed. Again, look to see how you're stabilizing on one compared to the other. If you can get some more high quality video to be able to see, and also high frame rate video to really see how much time you're spending on the ground and comparing it right to left, I think it'll make a big difference in your overall performance. But a lot of times, again, you could just see from right to left side, like we could see here, he's going to stabilize a lot better on his left. So his left foot is going to be off the ground much quicker and much more effectively. And that push off is going to be better. Even though this athlete is right-handed, he's going to end up getting a better push off and being more effective off of the left, because it's just a lot more efficient. The right one, while it's a stronger leg, more powerful leg, he's just not going to have as much control because of what he's doing with his leg at foot strike. And then we'll go into toe offs. And the last thing is going to be, how is the foot toeing off? How does the foot push off the ground to then transition to the next one? So what's important here is we want to be able to get the foot to be be facing more straight back. And again, there's just so many differences here that we're seeing. I mean, this is, I think, the fifth and sixth different athlete that we're seeing, and how their foot ends up pushing off the ground and how that ends up leading to the foot strike. So we can see here, the foot is really turning, again, a lot of internal rotation here instead of extension. It's not really bad with the foot, but we can see how this ends up transitioning into not a great drive through. So his knee really wants to be coming straight through, more similar to like what we're seeing here on the left side. That's a pretty good knee drive in comparison to this. This is pretty wide. Okay, so that's going to make it so then as that foot strikes the ground, it's not going to, the toe isn't going to come up. We're not going to get as much power at foot strike. So then we're going to be really reacting to foot strike rather than being proactive when it comes to your foot strike. It's an important concept to understand. We got to be proactive when it comes to our foot strike. And the best way to be able to do that is to have a more effective toe off, where we can, again, we can see this ends up being not great on either side, pushing off more of the outside part of the foot rather than the inside part of the foot. And while the knee comes through well, we're not getting, again, a good foot strike. The foot is turning too far out to the side. We're landing with the foot underneath the hip, which is going to negatively impact the performance. So really, when it comes to the toe off, again, we want to really be able to get to the front edge of the big toe, so then the back part of your foot is facing straight back as it's coming off the ground, or as the foot's coming off the ground. Let me use this as an example. This is a professional sprinter. We could see how the foot ends up toeing off. This is going to lead to perfect extension, or, great extension, to then be able to get the leg straight through, as opposed to really anything else. If your foot is turning inwards, if your foot's turning too much outwards, if at the toe off we're getting too much or excessive amounts of rotation within the foot, within the ankle, this is all going to impact how the leg cycles and then how the foot ends up striking the ground. So look at your leg cycle and spend the time, do the single leg cycles. Don't run at 100% all the time until you can really understand how to use your foot to both strike the ground, balance and absorb, as well as push off. I know there's a lot of information that we went over, and I know I talked kind of quickly. I didn't have a lot of time to make this video, but still, I hope this ends up being very valuable for you. I hope you could use it in your own speed training, your own development. Would be happy to help you guys out. There's a lot of great things that we have available for athletes. If you're looking to get faster, improve your 40, improve your 60, 100, whatever the case may be, there's some great things that you can use to be able to make that happen. And a lot of the focus will be, when you work with me, on your leg cycle, on your technique. I know we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here with focusing on technique, but when you could really get specific into these things, I think it really makes a big difference. And this is what I do all the time. I'm getting very, very specific into the biomechanics, how you're sprinting, and that's how I think I get the best results. So check out down below if you want to. And thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.